Another one of my New Year's resolutions was to try to speak more specifically about the kinds of things I think will help us personally, each one of us individually, live out the joy of being free and spiritual people. And the reason I feel this is really important is because progressivism is actually collapsing in front of our eyes. And there are a lot of different reasons. Joel Kotkin, excellent political observer, wrote a piece at unheard.com. He said, over the past several decades, the progressive left has successfully fulfilled Antonio Gramsci's famed admonition of a long march through the institutions. In almost every Western country, leftist adherents now dominate the education system, media, cultural institutions, and financial behemoths. But what do they have to show for it? Not as much as they might have expected. Rather than a Bolshevik-style assumption of power, there's every chance this institutional triumph will not produce an enduring political victory, let alone substantially change public opinion. Even before Biden's botched Build Back Better initiative, says Kotkin, American progressives faced opposition to their wildly impractical claims about achieving zero COVID and zero emissions, confronting systemic racism, quote unquote, by defunding the police, regulating speech, and redefining two biological sexes into a multiplicity. Increasingly, the march has started to falter. Now, part of this is obviously true. I mean, if you watch them, they are back on their heels in almost every way. And part of it is just the fact that leftist ideas don't work. And the right often lives off this fact. We live off the fact that leftist ideas fail. And so, their cities are collapsing. People are moving away by the hundreds of thousands. I think over 1 million people have left the blue states to go to red states. The crime, even the left is now forced to admit that crime is out of control in their cities. The lockdowns accomplish nothing. They damage children. Masks are damaging children. They're all starting to talk about this as if we haven't been saying it all along because they don't listen to us. So they don't know that we've been talking about this all the time. And the arguments with which they replace this, you're racist, the sky is falling, Trump, those are not going to help people when they can't afford to buy meat. That doesn't work after a while. People will be intimidated and insulted for a while, but after a while, they want their kids in school, they want their streets safe, they want the economy to work, and the left is incapable of doing any of those things because socialism doesn't work. But more important, and more long-lasting, and more to the point in terms of what we want to do, is that they are miserable. I had this really interesting experience on New Year's Day. I read most of my news like everybody on devices, but I do get the Wall Street Journal as a newspaper, and it's really interesting. Reading a newspaper is a much more immersive experience than using a device. You can see different things. It's like being in a bookstore. You just get more of a sense of what's going on. The Wall Street Journal doesn't print on federal holidays, so it didn't print, and my news guy, the delivery guy, instead brought me the Washington Post and the New York Times. So these, which I usually read on devices, I was completely immersed in, and I thought, no wonder these people are miserable. This is insane. This is a world that doesn't exist, a world of in crisis after crisis after crisis, and a world with just no moral guidance on behavior. I've noticed now there is a genre in the press, in the left-wing press, of miserable people writing op-eds telling you that you can be miserable too. Now, I'm sure you have this experience in your ordinary life. I'm sure you have friends who come to you and say, you ought to stop making your husband dinner. It's like you're a slave. And you say, well, how's your marriage? Well, my husband left me for the nanny because she makes him dinner and takes care of the kids, and he wants somebody to take care of them. These miserable people want to spread their misery. And so article after article after article in these papers and other left-wing venues, especially keyed in to attacking what is, for most of us, the great consolation of life, which is love between a man and a woman, and usually expressed in marriage, or most wholly expressed in marriage. And I see article after article, especially by women, saying they've destroyed their marriage, and what a wonderful thing this is, even though you can tell even by reading the piece that they're miserable. I got to read just a little piece of this from a senior editor at the Atlantic named Honor Jones, How I Demolished My Life. And what she says is she was rebuilding her house, she was designing her house, when suddenly she realized, I don't want to design my house, I just want to divorce my husband. And she says, I loved my husband, it's not that I didn't, but I felt that he was standing between me and the world, between me and myself. Everything I experienced was filtered through him before I could access the experience. And the worst part, that it wasn't his fault. It's what I asked him to do, to shelter me from the elements, to be caring and broad-shouldered. But now it was like I was always trying to see around him. I couldn't see, but I could imagine. I started imagining other lives that I might have. I wanted to be thinking about art and sex and politics and the patriarchy. How much of my life had I built around my husband? Who could I be if I wasn't his wife? Maybe I would microdose. Maybe I would have sex with women. Maybe I would write a book. Now, this is a woman who then proceeds to destroy her marriage with little kids in the marriage. So she blows up the planet that these children live on. The children live on the planet of your marriage. She throws her vows to her husband away, and she deserts him. And it's all about how now she feels raw and alive, and she's obviously miserable. And the one thing that just throughout this entire article I was reading, I was thinking, at no point does she ever ask herself, did I do something wrong? Did I do something immoral? Did I do something that transgressed against a moral order? And that is the thing that makes people unhappy, whether they like it or not. If you feel incredibly alive by driving over somebody else, you will ultimately be miserable. And the left has abandoned any kind of moral structure. They don't have a moral structure because a moral structure is a supernatural thing. And I know whenever I use this, they think I'm talking about magic. But what I mean is that when you take an act in nature, like giving a beggar bread or torturing a child, it has a meaning. It has a moral meaning. And that moral meaning exists above nature. It is supernatural. They don't have that. They believe that we're motivated by sex, that we're motivated by money, that we're motivated by materialism. And so what we have to do is we have to put forward a positive vision of what it means. Every study shows the conservatives are happier than the miserable left. The left is just increasingly miserable. I know a lot of them. I know they're miserable. And when you're blowing your marriage up, when you're doing stuff that's wrong, when you don't really know it's wrong, when you don't have anyone to say, yeah, you're doing the wrong thing, and instead you got to do the right thing, you have no guidance. Morality is a kind of an allegory. It is acting in a way that reflects a higher set of values. You know, we had this conversation with my friend Liz Wheeler a while back. And I said to her, you know, guys don't get as much out of marriage as they used to. When I got married, I had a woman to make me a home, to make me dinner, to take care of my kids, to help me with my career, to actually be a sort of world for me to live in, which I didn't have because I'm a kind of itinerant, artist type, and I really didn't have a world. And my wife built for me a world that I could live in and act in and have the life that I wanted to have. She enhanced my life. And I don't think guys get that as much. And I asked Liz, well, what's the point now of getting married? And for a guy, what's the point of a guy getting married? And here is what she said.
Well, I think if you're coming at it from a Christian perspective, then you get to live out some of the mystical union between God and his church. And I know that as a Catholic, as Christians, that's what we believe, that marriage is this peak, if you will, into this love that God has for his bride, which is his church, that we can't fully understand while we're here on earth. And God gives us this union between man and woman and says, love each other the way that I love my church, whether that's the respect, whether that's the all controversial term of submission, which we know does not mean subservient. He tells us that this is a peek into the union between us as God's children and God. And so it doesn't have to be a situation where you're talking about a 1950s housewife who cleans the house in her high heels and has her husband's dinner on the table for him when he comes home from work every day. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but it doesn't have to be practically set up like that for you to have this really solid, and I'm talking about culturally solid in addition to spiritually, this really culturally solid institution that prevents a lot of societal ills.
You know, it's funny, when she said that, I thought, you didn't answer the question. You know, I love Liz and she's a great commentator, but I just thought, that doesn't really tell me what a guy gets out of getting married. But in a way it also does, because it tells you what you're trying to do. Those are big words. It's big words to say, well, you're representing something godly. When you represent yourself as a man, you're representing the male Godhead. When you represent yourself as a woman, you're representing the female Godhead. That is the real, when they talk about gender assignment, that's the assignment. That's what you're supposed to do. And everyone is different, but still, I don't think it hurts. Not every man is a soldier, but I don't think it hurts every man to try and have the integrity and courage that go along with being a man. Not every woman is a homemaker. Not every woman is a mom, but I think it helps every woman to try and achieve the tenderness and generosity that go along with womanhood. When you do not have that supernatural realm to act in, you don't know where you're going. You don't know what's the difference if I dump my kids as long as I feel better. When you do have it, you can sometimes get too restrained. You can sometimes think that you start to pass judgment on other people, and are they doing what they're supposed to do? But each of us, I think, has an individual mandate, an individual command to fulfill our moral obligations and to fill our moral identity. And that's a positive thing that we do with our lives. Each one of us has to do it individually according to our calling. If we do that, we're going to have the kind of joy, the kind of moral life, and the kind of good life, the kind of beautiful life that we can hold up to the left and say, you know what? You don't have to live like this. You don't have to live alone. You don't have to destroy your marriage to find life. You don't have to destroy your cities to be fair. You don't have to destroy your economy to feel that you're being a generous person. There is a way, freedom, capitalism, governed by moral values that we can put forward. And this is the moment. This is the moment as we come into the midterms. Their system is falling apart. And we have to understand how to represent the moral vision and the moral order, or we're not going to be able to take advantage of this incredible moment. If you love great content like this, like and subscribe. And if you want more, subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.